Hi, welcome back to Crafting a Country Life, and if you are new to my channel, I hope you enjoy what you see and possibly consider subscribing to my channel, and welcoming back my viewers who routinely check in. I wanted to jump on today and share a project that I've worked on over the weekend. And there are lots of different ways of doing these, but I was inspired when I hunted around online a little bit and found so many different YouTubers creating these in their own very special way, and I just kind of looked at many different ones and then kind of made my own, took my own twist on it. But these are collaged fabric strips. Let me hold this up a little closer so you can see it. Now, this one that I made this one first. This is just using fabrics from my sewing stash, and I have a lot of ginghams. So I thought, well, for the first one, I'm going to just start with the ginghams because they go well together. The colors are similar. They're very soft and pastel, and that's the look that I was after for this one. So what I did was I found some old register receipts that I had in my desk, and I used these as the backing, only because it's recyclable and this is a fun way to use them up. Plus they're thin and they're easy to glue fabric pieces onto, and then also stitch afterward on the sewing machine or even by hand if you wanted to. But you could use paper strips, adding machine tape rolls, old recycled mail, whatever you have, you can use as a base. So the first step then is to go ahead and choose a selection of different fabrics. I've been sewing for many, many years, and I have here's just one jar of scraps that when I'm working on a sewing project and I have tiny scraps left over at the end or the edges cut off of selvages and so on, I would just tuck them into this giant mason jar and hang on to them. So I pulled these out first. It's just a small selection of a few. Then they're all just tiny little snippets. Some are longer and bigger than others, but this is basically what's in the jar. Okay, so went through and pulled out, some pieces that I could use. I guess it's a lesson in don't throw anything out, but that can be a double-edged sword too, right? If you don't have a lot of storage space. I also had this other extra bag of some fabric strips that I had gotten on clearance. I don't even remember where. I've had these in my stash for a long time, but the colors are very kind of mid-century and pretty, and they all coordinate beautifully together with the different colors, so you can use things like this. I also have a little caddy that I have filled with small bits of small bits, but they're larger than what I have in my scrap jar. And so this is just another way that you can store them for easy access. So I'm going to take you through my process just so that you can see how I do it. There's a million different ways you can do this, but in my craft room, I keep an old magazine, and I've written right on the front scrap. So when I'm ready to do any kind of collage work, gluing work, or even when I'm making albums and books, I use this, and I can, like poke into it. You can probably even see some of the holes on the cover in the glare there, where I've poked an awl through to get the holes through my book signatures. This is wonderful for that. And especially for gluing, you just open up the magazine, choose any page you want to start on, lay the magazine down, and then you have a surface to work on. So I would take my receipt paper. We'll just do a small one for now. Here's my receipt paper. And then depending on how wide you want these, sometimes I'll leave them as is, or you can fold them in a little bit or cut off the edge a little bit to make them a little bit narrower. And then, of course, taking a good quality glue stick. I like the Elmer's Craft Bond. I use these in my classroom at school. I'm an art teacher, so I've had an opportunity to try lots of different glue sticks. The Elmer's Craft Bond works really well. And the other glue stick that I really like is the Yoo-hoo stick. I don't know what I did with mine. It's not on the surface of my desk at the moment, but the Yoo-hoo stick is a yellow, oh, here it is, wait, let me show you. It's a yellow barrel, and it's got a screw-off cap on the top here. These stick really well, and they're quite permanent. Some of the other brands like Ross, like the Ross glue sticks, you know, they're okay. They drag a little bit when you go to glue. So if you're working on something very thin, this Ross stick can tear easily. This is not my favorite. And they're not as permanent as these other two brands that I just showed you. Anyway, so much for glue. So those are the glue sticks. And then all you need to do, if I'm folding this receipt, I like to just put a little glue right down the side. Now, since I'm working on the inside of a magazine, any overage of the glue is going to go on the magazine, not all over my work surface. Okay, so there's my strip of paper, and now that's my base, and I'm going to get started adding pieces. So I'm going to open up my jar, pull a piece out. Here's this little seersucker type of fabric here. I'm just going to cut a piece off. Now you can use your pinking shears to do this, or you can just use a regular straight edge scissor. And it doesn't matter that it doesn't fit exactly onto your piece, because you can flip it over after it dries and trim off with your scissors to make it even if you need to. Okay, so I take my glue stick at this point and add glue. I like to start in the center and work my way towards the edges so that I don't get any fabric folding over onto itself. And just make sure your edges especially are secured with glue. And then just lay this onto your base paper and press it down. I like to also keep some baby wipes handy. My fingers get a little sticky when I'm doing this. I don't have any at the moment, but sometimes if you just rub your fingers, I tell my children at school, if you get glue on your fingers, just, rub them together a little bit, and the bits of glue will kind of dry up and bead up and fall off your fingers. Okay, so there's the first piece. Now, you can be very regimented about the way that you place these. I mean, these I kept quite linear. They're all horizontal and vertically placed. Or you can be more random about it. And the fun thing about doing these is that you can customize them to whatever theme you might want. You can do all one color, for example. You can choose fabrics from your stash that are all in a certain color range or a certain type of print. And let me show you what I mean by that. See, now this one here, I just overlapped this little green scrap onto the previous slightly purple scrap. And then I'm just going to work my way through and cover the entire piece of paper. Then I let it dry for a little bit. And then when I'm finished, I can flip it to the back side and just trim those messy edges off like so. So that is kind of the basic way to work on this. And you just keep going until you fill it up. So let me show you what I mean by different colorways. Here's the next strip that I worked on. Okay, this one is all kind of random shapes. I did some triangles, some squares, rectangles. Some of them have pinked edges using my pinking shears, which have that nice zigzag edge, and some of them have straight edges on them that I just use my regular fabric shears on to cut. And then I just sit and build the fabric strip. Now these fabrics I had in my large mason jar, and most of them came from scraps that I had from a charm pack that was all vintage 1930s flour sack designs. So I wanted to keep the vintage look of this fabric collage, so I used only the fabric selections from that particular charm pack. And I just think this is so pretty. This will look great in some of the vintage junk journals that I plan on working on, or card making, album making, all kinds of different paper crafts and mixed media projects. So that's the second one that I made. The first one that I showed you earlier with the ginghams is actually machine stitched on top. I don't know if it's really going to show up very well on my camera, but I did go over with my sewing machine and I just did straight stitching all around a few times, a few rows of that, just to give it a little added interest. And then the other colorway that I worked on was a Christmas theme. And all of these scraps came out of my mason jar. There's some green and red. There's some vintage 1950s Christmas bell fabric that I had picked up at Joann's a few years ago to make Christmas napkins with. So the cutoffs I used from that to build in sort of a vintage look on these. You can see kind of a little bit of a vintage candy cane here on the side. And then, let's see, here are some bells right here. Let's see if those are going to show up right in here. Oops. You can see these vintage 1950s bells. And there's a little mid-century Santa Claus. So this was really fun to put together. And this one I haven't stitched yet. I probably will be stitching it with either some glitter thread, maybe some red glitter thread, or some green glitter thread, just to kind of give it a little extra festive look. Okay, and then once these are all put together, this one I still need to trim. You can see there are some edges here that have to come off. So I'll just be flipping this over and trimming these like I did with the other one. Now, you can also mix these. They don't have to be strictly fabric. You can use fabric and cardstock, fabric and tissue paper, fabric and any kind of paper that you might have, recyclable paper, old junk mail, vintage papers and ephemeras, whatever you happen to have, you can incorporate into this kind of process. Okay, and then let me show you a finished project with a little bit of this fabric collage strip that I made. So I cut a piece of this off and I added it to the front of this card here. Let's see if we can get this in focus. There. Okay. So what I did was I started with a pre-packaged card base. It's a Maggie Holmes design. And then I glued a light pink frame over it with a scalloped edge. And then I put a couple of tag die cuts on that I made, added some ribbon. And then right here, where there's a bloom sentiment that I put together and added. But right here you can see a little piece of that fabric collage that I cut out and pinked the edges with my pinking shears. Hopefully you can see that. And I just think it adds so much texture and charm to the vintage look of this card front. I also added a vellum rosette up in the corner with a tiny little heart die that I glued some sequins onto and put some enamel dots around. And I also made these little flowers and put some, what is that, stickles? You can see a little bit of shininess there. Well, maybe it's not showing up so well. But yeah, so that's how I created this particular project. And I'm really looking forward to using these fabric collage strips in other projects. So I'm all excited and inspired to try that next and see what I can do with these. And I will say it was so relaxing just sitting in my studio. I had the music on. I pulled out the scraps from my scrap jar in the back here. I had them out all over the table. And just like auditioning the colors and pieces together to see which choices I really liked, and then gluing them down was really, really a very relaxing activity. So I give you a chance, hopefully, to give it a try and see what you think, if it's something that you like, and see what you come up with. All right, thanks for joining me today. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back again soon with some more projects. Take care. Bye for now.